Hi everyone, I'm Luam Kafala and welcome to the Africa Playbook. Today's guest is a founder and CEO of Africa's largest Proptech, Nawy, Mostafa El-Beltagy. Full disclosure, Nawy is a portfolio company of Proptech Africa and I am a massive fan of them. Welcome to the podcast, Mostafa.
Thank you, Luam. Pleasure to be here.
I'd love to start the conversation by learning a little bit about who you are, what your journey was before you started Nawy, and how you kind of came to become an entrepreneur.
I always thought I would be an entrepreneur one day. Started out my life in corporate. And even then I thought I'd do corporate for a year or two max. That was sort of my thing. I had no idea what I wanted to do as an entrepreneur, but it always felt like something that was exciting and something I wanted to do. 12 years later, I was still working with Vodafone. That's the company that I spent most of my professional career with. And honestly, the main reason for that is I got to be an entrepreneur within the business. And I got so many growth opportunities that were almost impossible to turn down. So the learning curve was just way too fast. So I started out in Egypt, young guy, but I was given the responsibility to make Vodafone the #1 player in terms of customer numbers.
Yeah.
And quickly, by the top management in the company, I was empowered enough to make actions that actually drive that change. So super exciting when you're 22 years old to have the opportunity to do something like that. By the time I was 26, I was offered an opportunity to go to South Africa and lead the $2 billion prepaid business.
Oh, wow.
At the same time, I had actually co-founded a startup in Egypt back in 2010.
Yeah.
And Google had given us $200,000. Back in the day, that was a really big deal. And it was a grant for being like the best startup in the region. And I wanted to turn down managing a $2 billion P&L and actually stay in Egypt to manage the small company we had created at the time. My mentor told me, "You're an idiot." I listened to him and I don't regret it. It was Ahmed Assam. He's now the CEO of Vodafone in all of Europe. And I learned so much managing a $2 billion business, then growing to London and managing commercial for all of Europe, then being a CCO of a company that was merging two businesses with a few thousand people on each side. Really got to play the big exec role, and luckily at a very young age, which gave me tremendous experience that finally led to me coming back, co-founding Nawy and having it be what it is today.
And for those of us who don't know, although I do know, what does Nawy do?
So Nawy is a Proptech that started out from one place but seemed to have been growing into many others.
Yeah.
And I think it's always been in the underlying ethos. Me, myself, I had went back to Egypt and I wanted to invest in property when I realized there was absolutely no data transparency. And there was no way I could find out how much properties appreciated by in the past, what sort of rent yields I should expect, what's comparable price per meters between certain places. All of that wasn't available. And I said, that's something we need to crack. So we started bringing that information to life. Then we also wanted to service clients because I realized that no one was giving me the service level I would expect. I want someone who's unbiased to help me. Everyone was trying to push me one way or another till I spoke to a very close family member and then actually now one of the co-founders of Nawy who actually helped me through that process. So it became very important that we also solve for that. So initially we started out as a listings platform, but then also a brokerage that had no ulterior motive except aligning with customer interest versus all other brokerages where we're trying to maximize their commission or return. So based on those ethos, the business was built. Then we realized that we could, with what we've built for ourselves, we could enable many other brokerages in the thousands to do a lot of what we have created access to ourselves. We built that up, so now we've become also a B2B platform where we help all these smaller players transact with all the major developers in Egypt. Then we went and said, okay, what other problems are there? And mortgage in Egypt is less than 1% of all transactions. So we went ahead and went and got a full mortgage license to really change how that market is playing, still in infancy. Lastly, back to my original problem, I was lucky enough to be among the top 5% who could afford to buy real estate as an investment. But for the remaining, let's say 20, 30, that was something that remains inaccessible. So we created a product that allows people to partially invest into real estate through online means, fully with your card, no physicality needed whatsoever, on the best picks that Nawy does. So now kind of turning into this like real estate super app.
Yeah.
Everything from lending to investing to finding to brokering. And now as we move into the future, also getting into property management and rentals. So hopefully anyone who wants to do anything in the real estate space in Egypt will somehow be working through one of Nawy's products.
That's amazing. And I think when we think about how big real estate is in Africa generally, it obviously makes a lot of sense for technology to play a role. But the sector itself here is still quite nascent.
Yes.
So I'm curious to understand from your perspective what you see as the big opportunity for Nawy long term, for Proptech long term, and
Sure.
also why you decided to go down this journey versus, let's say, something as common as fintech.
Yeah, I think, look, the way, honestly, the way we have been approaching this, the way I always look at things, isn't looking at a market opportunity first, but it's looking at a customer insight first. And what is the pain point we're trying to solve for?
Yeah.
Often that's very local. Sometimes, obviously, that carries over. That same point can, be repeated in many places. And there are lots of commonalities across Africa, but not just Africa. Even some of these things will carry over into Europe, and some will make no sense in certain African markets. So the idea is, as long as we find problems that need solving, as long as we see opportunities, we'll be chasing them. Obviously, we're looking at the region first, where we see the same sort of problems. Maybe not identical, but close enough, where there is our experience and our tech can lend a helping hand in order to change that ecosystem. So hopefully we'll keep solving more and more. And I generally believe when you're purpose-driven from that perspective, even if you're not optimizing commercially to the dot, sometimes long-term, or most often long-term, that plays out to a much better result than when you're trying to find how to hit the bottom line first.
I like that. Makes total sense. And since it took me way too long to learn this, what does Nawy mean?
Nawy means, Nawy literally translated from Arabic means intent.
Okay.
But in our culture, it's also often used in relation to big decisions. So when someone is intending to buy a house, that is, the word used before saying, I want to buy a house. You say, I'm intending to buy a house, intending to get married. Those things come with this word. So it was a natural fit. But the backstory and the genuine story to this is we were searching for a brand name that had a .com domain. And that could make sense for our business in any way, shape, or form. And late one evening, me and my wife were scrolling through lots of open domain names. She came across this one. I was like, that's a light bulb one. That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it actually perfectly fits what we're trying to build. So that's the real backstory.
It worked out.
Yeah, it worked out.
Yeah. For someone that did not know what it means, it's very catchy as a name. So it worked out really well. Well, one of my favorite things I think about Nawy, and one of the magical things that a lot of people feel and see when they meet you, is the magic of the team.
For sure.
Around you. So it'd be great to kind of understand the backstory behind that team, how you guys came together, and the roles all of you play. Yeah,
so I think one thing is this team is super diverse in terms of talent, character, background. It is massively diverse. And I genuinely believe that when you're co-founding a company, diversity is much more important than having two people who were both investment bankers or worked at McKinsey and then went and did X, Y, and Z.
For sure.
Now, the reality is we had almost two companies. There was a digital business. And there was a brokerage business. And the story came from very close and personal relationships. So I had convinced my best friend from elementary school, one of our co-founders, Abdulazim, to, when I went through this, over a weekend, I wrote a product doc. But I didn't have the time to go and execute it. So I convinced him to leave the family business, which he'd been doing for a long time. And he was from a very different background to running a traditional family business. So he's like an MIT grad in economics and worked at Booz, and then found himself for a few years in that business and wasn't really loving it. And thought he could do more. I said, what have you got to lose? Ali was the co-founder and the original founder of the idea we had started up back in 2010. The ultimate 0 to 1 guy, computer science graduate, worked in marketing, worked in commercial, understood finance. So he could build the whole thing himself in a day. Like, you come and you help us put this together as well.
Yeah.
So that was one side. Other side were my cousin and the person who helped me when I was looking for real estate, and again, a lifelong friend. Yeah. So Ahmed and his partner at the time, Ghanima, were leaving the big corp because they decided they want to do something on their own, and they had worked for the biggest developers in Egypt. And yeah, I mean, very shortly afterwards, we said, why don't we partner up? Knowing that eventually this should become one company, but that they had already too much money that they were making as it stood, that it wouldn't make sense for us to take a piece of their business without bringing value. And eventually it did merge and become one company. But the dynamic, and one of the, I think, big magic points, as you say, in the business, is everyone genuinely brings something different to the table.
Yeah.
Even amongst the people who overlap in skill sets, there's still very unique components and experiences that each and everyone brings. And finally, there is tremendous trust built over many years, long before we even got into business together, that makes those relationships fundamentally solid in a way that nothing happening in the business can affect it. So we've been lucky. I touch wood, it stays that way. But it is a humongous asset. And something we don't take for granted.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's quite unique.
Yeah.
I mean, usually you don't see founding teams that are more than 2-3 people, and you're 5, which is quite a significant number.
And I think the funny part is, I mean, on the weekends, our families are meeting with each other.
Yeah.
Our kids, like, it's not just weekdays that we're almost 24/7, literally, some way or another around each other. That is, it's great in my point of view. And it's something I had missed sometimes when I had started moving around a lot in corporate. Because you know that the relationships are very short-lived.
Yeah.
It's 2-3 years, and then you move on to something else.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're building with someone that you know you're building with for a long time, that relationship gets much deeper. And I very much appreciate that. And you have to have fun at work as well. I mean, that's a massive part of being successful at what you do.
Absolutely. And I think also building like a really strong relationship with your co-founders.
Yeah.
Like, can weather the storms and the ups and downs is quite critical. And it's something you guys are lucky enough to have that level of trust.
Yeah.
Because usually, I mean, for a lot of investors, looking at a very large founding team, there's always a question. Like, there's always a concern about attrition. There's always a concern about how do you sort of manage a big team. But it seems like for you guys, you've been able to do that quite well.
Yeah, I think the harder part, and I don't mean in the fact that it was actually hard, but finding the rest of the executive team that would be a cultural fit.
Yeah.
It's also something we were very lucky to have. And it is because of that now. I mean, that same culture that existed between the founders has transpired into the rest of the executive team.
Yeah.
And that makes it, again, a great work environment, and something we're all happy to be a part of.
Which brings me to my next question.
Yeah.
So I think I know you relatively well, and well enough.
You do?
Well enough to kind of say that one of your superpowers is the way that you run and enable your teams.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a difficult skill set for a lot of people to develop, especially as you continue to grow the company. And so I've been super impressed to see how you've been able to do that. If you were to give like any perspective or advice on how do you grow, scale, enable strong executive, high-functioning teams,
Sure.
what would you give other founders?
So first, I have to say, I mean, I was very lucky to have worked in big corporate at the scale I did, in the way I did, at the time that I did. And it's not just what I saw work out well, but a lot of what I saw that didn't work out so well in corporate that has defined how I manage Nawy today. The other part is, I've learned that one of the big issues, and I'll take it from the corporate world, one of the big issues in a corporate environment when you're trying to launch something new is you often suffocate that something new with the bureaucracies of the existing. And although the existing doesn't feel like it's suffocating it, it doesn't know that that's the reason. It's almost oblivious to the fact that that's why this thing is dying.
Yeah.
The small things here and there make it so hard for something that is so small to go through all these processes that have become second nature to an organization. So one of the things I was very conscious of as we built up these new business lines
Yeah.
was to hire really good people, people that I trusted, and give them the autonomy to run to the point where I'm most often telling them, even if I have a different opinion,
Yeah.
you go the way you want to go. Like if you want to use me as a team member that you're bouncing ideas with, I'm happy to be that guy. But there are situations where if you disagree with me, I'd rather you keep your belief and sense of ownership than take that away from you for any decision that's going to happen. Because once you take that away, what ends up happening is everything gets delegated upwards. So if I say no to this, no to that, then you don't want to go and do
Anything.
because what if you do it and it wasn't what I wanted?
It's true.
Or what if it works out in another way and I would have wanted it another way?
Yeah.
Then you find yourself mentally crippled and not moving as quickly, even if it wasn't an organizational thing that required you to have that approval. So the sense of autonomy of each and every business owner is highly, highly important to me. And I'm very careful and cautious not to let governance take that. So it's very important for all of us to be aligned. It's very important for all of us to see and know what's going on.
Yeah.
It's important that the executive team culture is that you aren't playing your function, you're playing a role on the executive team.
Yeah.
So everyone can have an opinion about anything and everything, but we know who's responsible for what and who needs to take what forward at the end of the day. It is a hard balance. I won't, and I mean, there are times where we might have went too far this way or too far that way, and we end up finding the balance again. But it's just something I've become super conscious of, having seen both the good and the bad of that in a different life.
Yeah, fair. So it sounds like trust is just at the center of that, being able to
Huge,
trust the people you're
huge.
hiring.
And having the right people, again.
Yeah, makes a difference.
As a CEO, I'd say 90% of your success is in one, setting your vision, but then finding the right people around you who are going to make it happen with you.
Yeah.
And it could make or break you, one small decision in that space. You need to also be able to learn to act fast and fair when you have made those mistakes. I'm not one of those CEOs who's like, if it doesn't work out in 2 months, you fire them immediately, especially not at that level within the organization. But if you know something isn't working out, probably the other person knows that too.
Yeah.
And you could spend 2-3 years getting them out of the business, or you could have a very honest conversation and get that done in 3 to 4 months in a way that they can still leave with their head held high and you can still manage the business moving forward without creating that massive impact or lag that would take that time. And I think that's a maturity that, again, you get with experience. And it's very, very hard the first time to have these conversations.
Yeah.
It gets a bit easier. It's never fun, but it gets a bit easier. And you do have to do them if things aren't working out the right way.
Yeah. But I can imagine as a founder, the company is kind of your baby. And so giving up like some level of control over the day-to-day outcomes of what's happening with your child is tough.
Yeah. I joke with like the specialists in product when they come to me, for example, on a quarterly basis for a review, that I'd rather be doing their jobs than mine. I'd have more fun being the product guy or the commercial lead. Like those are the things I genuinely love.
Yeah.
And I'd love to roll up my sleeve and do what they do.
Yeah.
Sometimes I even tell them, keep me in check if I go too far, because I'm just getting too excited. Like don't look at me as the CEO who's doing that. I am a product guy or a commercial guy who's just getting excited about the topic. So feel free to tell me, like, just back off a little, and I genuinely will. Yeah, it's hard, but you realize that if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to execute the same amount of things that you could do. And I had a manager a long time ago who told me, your success is when your subordinates can create work that is at the quality you would have done yourself or higher.
Oh, wow.
Then you're successful as a leader.
I like that.
Until then, if you're getting the work done through them, then you haven't really made yourself the right leader for that area or domain that you're managing. So I keep that close to heart.
I like that.
And I try to do my best, give my opinions, and often they do respect me enough, and they will. And I try to make good enough arguments that they will follow what I want them to, but not from a position of losing empowerment, rather as someone or a member of the team that is putting forth a good idea that they would take. And I'm also happy to be wrong. And I tell
That's
them that
important.
all the time.
Yeah.
So I mean, even if they go in a direction I don't like,
Yeah.
I support and try to make that direction work.
Yeah.
And I say I'm very happy to be proven that this was better than what I was proposing in the first place. I'm going to be the happiest person if it works out. So I'm always trying to learn myself and trying to be humble and keep that humbleness into the business.
Very fair. So maybe in that vein, though, why entrepreneurship? And what do you love about it? What do you hate about it?
So I think...
Heavy question.
No. It's a very... I mean, I have a very, very clear question to that. It just has a lot of context to
Yeah.
it. So I'm trying to be as articulate as possible. So for me, I love creating. I love building. And entrepreneurship is really the ultimate way in which you do that. I was very lucky when I was working at Vodafone to be able to build with massive resources behind me.
Yeah.
And again, I'll say the most I enjoyed when I was a younger guy with a lot of power that didn't have to manage the politics, or I just had to do the work.
Yeah.
As long as the work was successful and was seeing light, then I got my satisfaction. So that was always the thing that gave me satisfaction. As I grew in the corporate world, there was less and less of that satisfaction and more of having to enable everyone else. And sometimes it became 80%, 90% of my time is in managing the environment so that things can be created, and only 10% is going there. So I was losing a bit of that sense of gratification that I had when I was genuinely building. So I love the build. And I wanted to get that back. So that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to get into entrepreneurship. Beyond that, I also believe that the impact you can have becomes massive. Like we were a 20 people company in 2021. Now we have 800 people.
That's crazy.
It makes me proud. It makes me proud to have that happen.
Yeah.
And it makes me proud to also see people, even if they leave the company one day, who have learned something on this journey that's going to go and create more and more out there. And that was one of my biggest gratifications in the corporate world as well. So I'm happy to have that impact. And again, finally, I think it could create, on the, let's say, medium to long term, some level of financial autonomy that can also allow you to create impact in other ways. That being a person in corporate, probably from a personal life perspective, much less risky to continue and maintain fantastic lifestyle and great pay.
Of course.
But less in terms of having enough money to actually go and change things around society that you may want to eventually be able to have an impact in. So that's long-winded, but that is the reason as why entrepreneurship, at least for me.
Makes sense. On the other side of it, what do you dislike about entrepreneurship? I know what you're gonna say, but I'm gonna ask you.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're gonna like this. Honestly, the thing I most dislike is probably the fundraising.
Yeah.
And not just the relationship building or meeting people. That part I don't mind so much. But the idea that you are in a perpetual state of burning sometimes, that you know there's runway and you have to sprint towards the end of that mountain.
Yeah.
With faith that at the end you'll be able to extend, where that mountain ends and you don't fall off the edge. And the reverse of that. So I remember when we were doing, for example, our Series A.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to have other investors who were coming in earlier.
Yeah.
And then knowing that you have 3 or 4 months left, but you don't have the funds, and you have, at that time, I think 200, 300 people that are in that company depending on you. And they don't even see the end of that cliff. They don't realize where we're at. So you feel that burden. That was very, very heavy to bear.
Yeah.
It very, very different level of stress to anything I had experienced prior to that. So that part I didn't like so much. But honestly, aside from that, there isn't like the work hours, how long you spend, the time you have for everything else is diminished.
Yeah.
But this is as much work as it is a hobby and something you love doing. So you don't feel like, I wish I could get out of work so I can do 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
You actually enjoy it. There are things that you wish you could do more.
Yeah.
But it's not that you don't enjoy what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Very fair.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, this is technically your second startup or your second
Yeah.
bout of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
I'm curious kind of what happened with the first?
Sure.
What did it teach you? And then it
Lots of
seems like
things.
you kind of moved into corporate and then made the shift back.
Yeah.
What was that journey like?
So the first one,
Yeah.
actually, I never moved out of corporate.
Okay.
I was doing it in evenings and weekends.
Oh, wow.
I was single. I had more time.
Fair.
And yeah, so the big thing is initially we were all doing that. All
Yeah.
the founders of that business were doing that. Yeah. Then it got to a point where I was actually making meaningful amount of money. And it needed full-time staff and not just the founders, but other people to make it run. And that was the point where I didn't make the leap out of corporate into the business, but actually I decided to become a board member. And I would fly out from like South Africa to Cairo for a weekend just to do a board meeting and fly back. Oh, wow. So I took it very, very seriously.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest learnings is the people who stayed in the business were all fantastic at what they did, but no one was truly responsible for the vision. So the 3 founders for a while kept swapping CEO roles because someone wouldn't believe that the other person's doing a good enough job in that space or wasn't driving the agenda forward enough. Mm-hmm. And we would go someplace and then not really finish it to the end, not persevere. You know, the first hurdle, or not the first, but after a few hurdles, we'd back off and go do something else. Yeah. So there was a bit of knee-jerking in all those different places. And it ended up that it was a very, very slow death to a business that was really, like, it was a leading brand and a business that was loved by hundreds of thousands. My biggest learnings were, one of the biggest roles of the CEO is to keep the vision of the business. Mm. And you can't outsource that to someone else in the organization, even another founder. If you're the CEO, your primary role is the chief vision officer. Yeah. It's not the execution. Yeah. It is making sure that the vision is there, that everyone is aligned, and keeping that harmony and keeping that balance and keeping that faith so that everyone around you gets that faith. Faith is contagious. Yeah. If you believe, others will start believing too. And once you prove, then the belief goes wider. Yeah. So I remember one of the first days, kind of call it, back when we were starting Nawy. And I had put the numbers on paper that we would actually be delivering around now. Yeah. And my co-founders thought I was crazy. And I said, this is doable. Like, I see it. Yeah. And even if they didn't see it at the time, they trusted that I did. Yeah. And they trusted that, if we all push forward, we'll end up somewhere. They thought I was insane. They still do sometimes. But once we did the first year and they're like, holy crap, this is happening. Then the next year when we were discussing targets, they said, okay, maybe. Yeah. And then the third year is like, you know what, this is just what it is. Yes, they seem insane now, but let's have faith and we'll take that forward. So I think having that faith, having that vision, without it, a business can really, really struggle. And that's one of the biggest learnings, that you can't have that sit outside of the person running the business. Yeah, fair. And when you think about, I guess, going back to Nawy and how you've kind of grown the business quite significantly over the last few years, extremely impressive. But like we were saying, Proptech is really still such a nascent sector. Yeah. And so you're probably having to learn a lot and, for better or worse, make stuff up as you go about how to run the business, how to grow the business, what to move into. And it's like a game of constant iteration, constant learning, constant testing. Yeah. And I'm curious how you manage that between you and the team, and then what it feels like to kind of be building, again, touch wood, a category leader in a market that's still largely overlooked. Yeah. Honestly, the simple answer is it just happens. Yeah. Like if I were to tell you how, I'll be feeling it now as we speak, but I can't tell you, like, we got into this line because 1, 2, 3. Yeah. It was just every time it was like that same epiphany moment of something here can be done. And I believe it makes sense. And I think we know how we should approach this. So far, so good. Like we've been almost 4 for 4 in terms of picking businesses and then creating something that is going to become meaningful out of them. That's not to say we're not going to mess up on one of them, right? So I think as an entrepreneur, generally you have a thesis. And most often you can only really test that thesis when you go to market properly. The reality is, and the question I ask myself, because we can have 20 different theses around what we see, because the opportunities are everywhere, is whether this thesis looks like it's going to be big enough, meaningful enough, and whether we believe we have the competencies to move ahead or at least start messing around that space or not. And if the answer to those 2 questions are yes, I find myself finding a way to add it somehow to the business.
Yeah.
And then the final litmus test for me is, how does this fit into everything else we've built? Has been fundamental for the next one and the next one.
Yeah.
And it's very much like a flywheel where if we get one right, it actually makes the other one work better.
Yeah.
And vice versa, and how you can integrate these businesses and create synergies and defensibilities that you couldn't get elsewhere from a strategic perspective. And if something kind of ticks those boxes and we have those ideas, we may not do it immediately, but we know it's one of these things that we're going to get into when the time is right for it. And that's how it's happened so far. But like, we don't sit and say, what's the next line of business? Or, where is this going? It just seems to be the vision gets clearer and clearer as we move down the path.
Yeah.
And as that happens, you start to see the missing pieces that need to come to make that come to life.
Yeah. But I think also, to give you some credit, you're pretty good at like starting to isolate categories that could be potential additional products or additional revenue streams. And it's been fascinating to kind of see you move from a brokerage business into the partners business and into these other new business lines. And I think what you said is a massive point, which is it feeding kind of the rest of the business?
Yeah.
I think this is a mistake a lot of entrepreneurs make, is they want to move and jump to the next thing or the next thing or the next thing without seeing whether or not it's complementary with what you're
for
building.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Fascinating. And when you think about like what you want Nawy to be, how many years in are we now?
I think, since
Quite a
in
few
its
years.
current form,
Yeah.
since 2021. So
Okay.
since June 2021 is when we did our first fundraising round.
Okay, so a lot of things have happened
For sure.
in 2021.
Yeah.
But when you look like 5 years ahead,
Yeah.
where do you want Nawy to go, and what do you want Nawy to be?
So I think, again, now where we're going with this, I see a number of opportunities.
Yeah.
Obviously, what we do, I think, can be a multi-country business, because even if not everything, but different bits and pieces are needed.
Yes.
And I was very conscious, by the way, to stay away from markets where I didn't feel like what we had was relevant enough, even if those markets looked really shiny on the outside.
Yeah.
So I'm very keen and always believe that you should start from a customer problem or a customer need or a customer insight.
Yeah.
If you're not doing that, you're going the wrong way, trying to lift and shift something from one place to another.
Yeah.
But I generally believe there is enough replicability that we will be able to take this into a multi-geography business. So I think that's a very important point. 2, within the Egyptian context, honestly, on where we're going with some of the financial services, I see us becoming both, a savings platform and a lendings platform.
Yeah.
And what's in between that is actually just taking the money and getting payroll into that. So can it be a bank of sorts? Yes. But it's not a bank in the sense that we're providing classical banking services, but banking almost built around the real estate sector.
Yeah.
In a way where your investment assets and your lending assets are both happening on that side.
Yeah.
So that is something that I see potentially happening. I also see us getting deeper into the value chain of real estate. So where it stands today, we're helping brokerages. We're building tech to help developers. I think the further we grow our, if everyone's using our tools one way or another, the harmony and the synergy and the flow of the sector becomes significantly better.
Yeah.
And hopefully we put ourselves in the center of that. So on the transactional side, on the inventory management side, I see that happening. On the consumer side,
Yeah.
I see us moving more into those spaces as well.
Okay.
So it's an interesting vision from where we are now.
Yeah.
If you have this conversation with me in 2 to 3 years, I think I'll be saying more things.
Yeah.
So, and the newer things on the horizon, every time
Yeah.
you take a step forward, the future horizon, you start to see more and more things as opportunities.
Absolutely. Makes sense. And maybe as we think about like the topic of scale specifically, because you mentioned you kind of grew the team quite significantly over a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
What are the big lessons there in terms of growing your organization quite substantially over
Sure.
a few years?
So I think, for me, the organization in this context is really split almost into two.
Yeah.
Because there's the sales organization, and I have a very precise answer for that. And then there's the, tech, product, marketing, commercial organization. And that I have a very different answer for that. So the sales organization, one of the really key things that I, again, had learned managing thousands of sales agents at some point was that this has to be a numbers game. Although people look at sales and say, I know what this agent's doing because I heard him on that sales call.
Yeah.
That's great. But from a management level perspective, you should be able to work everything back to performance and numbers. And often what sales organizations do incorrectly is they measure just the final outcome. So have you made X many sales? You made X many sales, you're good. Yes, that's easy. Actually, that's the easiest part. When you make a lot of sales, I don't need to ask you a lot of questions. It means you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
But what if you didn't? Then how do you manage that organization?
Yeah.
If you don't understand the funnel from beginning to end, if you don't understand how you are actually assigning which leads to who, then you start shooting yourself in the foot because the organization gets too big and you lose sight of it, and no founder can keep track of that. So we became very, very conscious when we were small to build the culture that would scale up from the get-go. So we were numbers driven when we were 9, 10 sales agents.
Yeah.
And we're numbers driven now in a much more meaningful way when we're 500.
Yeah.
And each manager can have a conversation with his agents on, this was your presentation to meeting percentage. This is your meeting to closing percentage. Your colleagues have been able to convert X many of those leads into presentations. You haven't. And here's why. Let's break it down. I can spend some time with you on this. I can spend some time with you on that. If you're not ramping up, then very, very, very clear meritocracy. And we can say up or out in a very quick way. So that was critical for the sales organization. For the product tech marketing organization, initially, the hiring, you have to hire really capable, competent people. We had a very stringent interview process. Even when we were small, but we could afford to do that at least with the, fresh grads and 1-2 years experience. And initially that was everyone we were hiring because we couldn't afford the execs or the very senior people, but you had to make sure that the people you were bringing in, competent, fast learners, smart. And we had a very, very clear process from logic and math testing at the beginning.
Wow.
To character testing as a second interview, to case studies as a third interview.
Okay.
Which then led to a hire or not. And that worked out well. The bigger issue, I would say, was when we started to say we need middle management. It's not going to work anymore in order to run some of these things. And we have enough money now. We can afford to hire more expensive people. Sort of creating layers between people who are, for example, reporting to founder to find themselves now 2 or 3 layers even separated was a bit hard. But the beauty of growth is even though that person might have been more separated from founder, a lot of the time their scope of work was growing. So they didn't always feel like they felt a distance to management, which was definitely a pain. But they were also getting to do more, learn more, and action more. So our retention has been very, very high among all the people working in that space.
Yeah.
And our attrition has been very high in sales, driven by a very strong meritocracy, because we're putting in 30, 40, 50 people initially, now over like 100 people last month.
Wow.
In all the organizations were added. So in order to be able to do that, you need to also be able to take out the ones who aren't working out well very quickly.
And do you think your experience in corporate, because you kind of have a little bit of the best of both worlds, but also it's worth noting to say it's actually quite difficult to shift from a corporate mindset to a startup mindset.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if you think that your corporate experience really helped push you
For sure.
into structuring and growing teams.
I think the corporate experience, I mean, people often associate corporate with, you know, slow, heavy, boring. That's probably when I joined, why I said I'd only maximum do a year or two of this.
Yeah.
But I had a very different corporate experience than I think most have. And again, I was lucky to have worked with some exceptional people that I've learned tremendously from, and mentors that today I learn from.
Yeah.
So I didn't live that world, although I mean, I did definitely live that world in some parts as I grew, especially into the organization. But I got to experience a place where I was creating many, many things, and telcos, now I feel a bit older, but like back in 2009 or 2010, it wasn't mature. It wasn't like you could have everything all together in one package and it's simple and it's nice.
Yeah.
Going from there to now, there was so much innovation in making it accessible.
Yeah.
Letting it actually reach more people, making the products in a way that would create more revenue for the business, allow it to invest further, but not cannibalize on existing. It was a genuine startup.
Yeah.
Like, but it was really big.
Yeah.
But we, as a single person, I had enough space to influence massive commercial decisions in a massive business. So I'd say I'm actually very, very lucky. I mean, I wasn't working for an industry that existed for 30, 40, or 100 or 200 years prior.
Yeah.
I was working for something that was still pretty young.
Yeah.
And its infancy, and especially in emerging markets. So I got to experience that, and I think without it, I would not have been able to do what I do today.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have stumbled significantly more in execution than what has happened with us so far.
Yeah.
It's been pivotal.
Makes sense. Very fair. Nawy is now post Series A.
Yeah.
Again, what you've been able to do over the last few years, very impressive. I'm a little biased, obviously, but big fan of what you've been able to accomplish and how you've kind of grown the business and the directions you're taking it, not just you, but the rest of your team. If you were to start the whole process over again, what is like the one thing you would tell yourself? Or what are the two things you would tell yourself?
No, there are a lot. So there are, now here are some things I had no idea about.
Yeah.
When I got in, like with my corporate experience, I knew how to manage large teams, I know how to execute.
Yeah.
But I didn't know how important it is to manage your tax correctly. That was just something that was always taken care of.
Yeah.
I didn't understand the slightest bit how VCs thought. My world was, I was worlds apart in how I was thinking, like, you know, my initial pitch decks, and this was pre-2022, had like unit economics, ROIs. It didn't have things like the TAM, right?
Yeah.
So I was talking about like, we've built this thing and it's profitable, and if we get more money, we can make more of it.
Yeah.
And that's good enough for me, right? It wasn't about, I can grow this to 1,000 times. Yeah, I could, but that wasn't really my language.
Yeah.
So there are a million things that I learned on the journey. Corporate structures, incorporation, legal, especially in this space. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I would have spent a lot more time learning what I didn't know.
Yeah.
But that's hindsight 2020. And at the time, you couldn't know what you couldn't know, what you didn't know, right?
That's
so
true.
I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's something I had to learn along the way. I had to develop muscles and skills that weren't my comfort zone, and still isn't. And I sometimes wonder if I'm not doing enough in some of these spaces, because I know where my bias is and where my preference is, and
Yeah.
it is to be in the business, in the execution, in the build.
No.
That's what I enjoy. But there are other things that come with my job that are equally, if not more important sometimes.
Yeah.
And I have to balance those. So definitely I would have wanted to learn that earlier.
Yeah. You know my stance on this, though. I think you're an excellent CEO, even though maybe, again, from a founder perspective, at least in the beginning, you're not as, let's say, jargony or showy or visible. I think what you've been able to do, if I can compliment you and make you uncomfortable
you.
for a minute, is quite impressive. And coming in and learning a very different vertical than what you're used to.
Yeah.
Trusting and building a team around you that you can kind of throw things to that can run with it, and managing and growing a business in a very healthy way. That's not something that is as commonplace as you think. And even if you think to some degree it's a weakness, I think it's a massive strength.
No,
Massive
I think that's a good thing, but
Yeah.
I think I don't. The other bits is where I obviously have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
You have a lot to learn on everything, but there I still say I'm not equally good in doing those things as I am in the execution of the
I think
business.
you're good at the important things. I
Thank
think
you,
the
Laura.
execution of the business is the important thing.
Yeah.
So I think you're the best at the important things.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I know we need to wrap up shortly, so I'm going to ask you a question that I'm always curious about. You've lived abroad and actually made a decision to move back to the continent to build your company here.
Yeah.
What does building at home mean to you?
No, it means a lot. Actually, a big portion of why I moved back was to be at home. And you know, maybe a bit more on the selfish side. For me, and very personally so, one of the most important things is personal relationships. Mm-hmm. And as much as the money can be good, the life can be easy, and everything can be great.
Yeah.
If you don't get those small moments of, you know, deep connection with close family members, with lifelong friends, there's something that's continuously missing. And I was always keen on finding a way back home. And actually, the moment I decided to leave corporate was the moment I realized that my corporate path back to Egypt wasn't viable.
Yeah.
Or I didn't see that as a real option. Now, obviously, building at home also has meaning, because I think creating something solid, strong, having people work for you that are learning, creating livelihoods, that gives me a great sense of pride and pleasure. But the key driver, to be very honest, was my own selfish need to want to be back home to the people I'm close with.
Fair.
That was the biggest driver.
Yeah. Fair.
And wanting my kids to also get to experience knowing
Culture.
Where their roots are, who they are, who their family is. That's really important to me as well.
I mean, it's a pretty big thing, right? When you think about time, your life, what you want it to mean.
For sure.
Your personal relationships, your family, your home are all very, very significant things.
For sure.
And then also, I think the impact you're able to create here.
That's for sure.
I have no doubt you were creating a ton of impact abroad, but I think we could use more people like you.
Thank you, Laura.
So I think it's great that you're feeling the need to move back and felt the need to build Nawy into what it is today.
Yeah, and I think, again, I think if I hadn't moved back when I did, like I moved back in 2021, I think if it was 2022, it would have been too late.
Wow, really?
Because at the time when I moved back, I saw startups as being a viable option for a future, even if I wasn't going to make any pay for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
I was still willing to accept that, knowing that I could get funded, money's accessible.
Yeah.
I know that I can attract the right talent, and I can build something.
Yeah.
But if you were starting in 2022, when the world had really went upside down, to be polite.
Fair.
And Egypt had struggled excessively more than what was happening on the world scene.
Yeah.
It would have been almost impossible to believe that that's a time to go and start something. And it would have been too difficult to make that leap of faith.
Yeah.
So luckily it happened right before, it would have been too difficult to make that decision.
You know what's interesting? I moved back in 2022.
But it was before.
To be fair,
was it before the
world started to explode?
Yeah.
Yes, but shortly before.
Okay.
So it was a very interesting
So
year.
you got the last window.
Yeah, very interesting year from a market perspective. But I think to a degree strengthened my resolve even more.
For sure.
Like if I had to do anything anywhere, and if there was a market that needed me now maybe more than ever, it would be this one.
And we're very thankful for you being around.
Yeah.
You were the big advocate for Nawy, and you made it happen. So
I still am a big advocate.
yeah.
I still am a big advocate for Nawy, and I mean, very impressed with what you guys have been able to build. I think Proptech for a long time in our market's just been very, very slow growing, and we've seen obviously in other markets it's been a much more accelerated path. So
For sure.
having Nawy start,
But honestly, I think Africa's in a position, like in many other places,
yeah,
to leapfrog, because
I
I don't
agree.
think what we are doing is done in the US. I don't think it's done anywhere in Europe.
no, not at all.
I don't think that the synergies we'll be able to derive and the value we're able to give customer and partners can be done in those market contexts.
Yeah,
Because everything got built very fragmented and in niche.
true.
Whereas since nothing has been built, you can almost rethink it and build it from scratch.
True.
Much like WeChat, for example, in China,
Yeah,
has synergies that no US company can touch.
right.
Because it was never built that way. I think we do have that opportunity here
Yeah.
in many of the markets.
Yeah, I agree. And especially real estate as an entire value chain.
Yeah.
Like it's such a big industry in most African countries. And it's such a big contributor in terms of how people invest, where they put their money,
sure.
culturally, societally.
And the economy. I mean,
Yeah.
like think of Maslow's hierarchy. You
Yeah.
need shelter before anything else.
Yeah,
probably,
literally, exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And when you have limited income, then obviously that becomes a bigger chunk of where the money's going. So
Yeah.
percentage of GDPs on the continent,
Yeah.
a lot more towards real estate than in mature markets.
Yeah. And I'll say one thing I do actually really appreciate is, to your point about the customer insight, where you caught the customer and helping them make that big, large decision, creating a platform that someone can trust when
Yeah.
they need to trust.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the potential risk is massive for
Right.
them,
Right.
and the implication is massive, I think made a ton of sense.
For sure.
And
And
go ahead,
it
sorry.
only comes, again, like it is about aligning incentive. And I think anyone, in business, it's always about aligning incentive.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make that the person talking to the customer, their incentive is aligned with the customer rather than with the company.
Right.
And that's counterintuitive because
Yeah.
most often what you want to do is make sure that your people are working to maximize your gains, not the customer's gains. Whereas again, I think being purpose-led, that's a very clear choice we took and one we want to follow through with. And one we believe is bringing us very solid reputational gains that over time will materialize. But it wasn't a marketing strategy as much as it is just a core belief and ethos and
Yeah.
a purpose for the business.
No, and it's smart because you're addressing like a real problem for customers.
Yeah.
And you're addressing something that is so significant that, not to say that trust is not important in other segments, but trust is very important
For
in
sure.
this one because it's
For
a
sure.
meaningful decision.
Massive decision.
Yeah. and
Probably
it's a meaningful-
one of the biggest decisions
Probably of your
people take
life,
in your
yeah.
life. Yeah, no, for sure.
Outside of like marriage and kids,
Yeah.
like this is probably a really big decision for
Yeah.
most people. So being able to build something that can create that level of trust,
For sure.
especially in an environment where there isn't a lot of trust,
For
is
sure.
absolutely massive. And I agree and love your point around, because in more developed markets, it's so fragmented and competitive. Here, you kind of have the opportunity to build on top of what you have.
Yeah.
Synergistically. And I think Nawy is a good example of a company that's done that so well, to kind of see what else you can add and see what else you can add on top of that and launch products. And
We try.
yeah, no, great job. Great job, guys. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Mostafa. This was great.
Thank you. Same here.
Loved learning more about Nawy and loved sharing the story with everybody out there.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.